Alongside death, taxes, and terrible Adam Sandler movies, video game sequels are just another crushing inevitability of life. Sequels and franchises are the lifeblood of the industry, so you can bet a halfway successful game will be aiming towards at least 5 more follow-ups and numerous spin-offs in the pursuit of more delicious, lovely money. Yet even major franchises tend to run themselves into the ground eventually, at which point they usually just reboot and retcon the series and just start again. It's exceedingly rare for a huge series just to die out as a result of one poorly received title, but it has happened more than once. With this in mind, I'm Jules for WhatCulture.com, and here are 8 video game sequels so bad that they killed their series. Number 8. Medal of Honor Warfighter. Aside from the hilariously blunt title, there wasn't much fun to be had with Medal of Honor Warfighter. The game was a sad end for the series, acting less like a glorious German shepherd and more like a bonk pug with no back legs. It started life as an acclaimed shooter for the PS1, which even had input from Steven Spielberg, the dirty monkey, before being overtaken in a major way by the Call of Duty series and their Mountain Dew addled exploits. Medal of Honor tried to reinvent itself as a modern shooter for a couple of games, with Warfighter marking the end of the road. It was clear within the first 10 minutes of Warfighter that it was rushed out. I mean, the enemy AI is about as efficient as a toaster in a live firefight and provided no challenge. Plus, there were so many bugs you'd have thought that Ubisoft made it. EA, the actual makers of this dirge, have put the series on ice, and there's little hopes for another entry. The presumably titled Medal of Honor bullet shooter will never be seen. Number 7. Alone in the Dark. The original Alone in the Dark is credited as one of the first survival horror games, but the series never reached the popularity of rivals like Silent Hill or Resident Evil. The New Nightmare briefly made the series cool for modern audiences, only for the critically panned Uwe Boll movie and the glossy 2008 game reboot to undo that goodwill. The 2008 game was a big-budget, balls-out affair that tried to do so many things, and failed at every single one of them. Its big selling point was that players could start the game from any chapter they wished, and Lost-style recaps would fill them in on what they missed. This groundbreaking feature was panned across the board, and the much-hyped real-time fire mechanics were intensely annoying to deal with. The inventory system wasn't much better, where you could combine various items from the main character's jacket, like combining ammo and lighter fuel to make fire bullets. Yeah, the science was a bit dodgy on this one, and needlessly cumbersome. The game ultimately was just awkward to play, and Alone in the Dark's chances of becoming a major franchise were dashed. There was a spin-off game called Illumination in 2015, but there's a reason you haven't heard of it. Number 6. Streets of Rage 3. Anyone who's experienced the original Streets of Rage on the Mega Drive will have fond memories of jump-kicking punks in the face, consuming whole floor chickens, and yelling in frustration when they accidentally hit the A button and trigger the special rocket attack. Good times. And Streets of Rage 2 built on that foundation to deliver another solid beat-em-up experience. Streets of Rage 3, on the other hand, was a major letdown, and while it did try to experiment with the gameplay, introducing new features and a more in-depth story, it's ultimately pretty hollow when put alongside the other games. Even the soundtrack was weak in comparison, and overall it was a disappointing end to the series. There was actually a Streets of Rage 4 in development, but after Sega fell out with the developer, it became Fighting Force, forever destined to carry on that tainted, crusty memory. Number 5. Perfect Dark Zero. Perfect Dark was intended by Rare to be a follow-up of sorts to GoldenEye 64, which is still considered to be one of the most groundbreaking games in the FPS genre. But as a side note, don't go back and play it though, because it has not aged well. While Perfect Dark didn't quite hit the same heights as GoldenEye, it was still a great inventive shooter which pushed the N64 to its limits. The game was a big hit, so Rare spent a few years developing a prequel which eventually became an Xbox 360 exclusive. But whatever freshness they brought to the original game had long since turned to stank, however. And Perfect Dark Zero was just another bland shooter that sold well based on its lineage alone. And also the monstrous drought that was the Xbox 360 launch lineup. Nobody seemed to like it that much, and the series gradually faded into obscurity. There was a HD update of the original that got people excited briefly, but that flame died when they realised it just hadn't aged well. Since the release of Zero, there's been no word about a new Perfect Dark game, and that's unlikely to change. Number 4. Soldier of Fortune Payback. Soldier of Fortune was a really fun, if not totally ugly game, which was infamous for its balls-to-the-walls amazing dismemberment system. Blasting off arms, legs, and heads is old hat now, but at the time there was so much fun to be had throwing around more limbs than a Twister-based sex party. It could have been a long-running series with the right approach, but the mediocre sequel that Double Helix excreted out fatally wounded it, and the last game, Payback, finished the job. Payback had no story ties to the first 2 games and introduced a new hero that went around the world blasting faceless enemies, because who needs a plot when you're gunning down terrorists, am I right? Fans of the series hated it, and the poor response meant the franchise was made to sit in the corner, where it's been for nearly 10 years now. Number 3. Army of Two, The Devil's Cartel. While Army of Two never became the mega hit that EA would have liked, the first 2 games were solid co-op shooters with likeable, if somewhat douchey protagonists Rio and Salem. They changed up the formula a little bit for The Devil's Cartel, where 2 new heroes came in for more bro-tastic gunfights, and it was a supreme cringe fest of dank meme-worthy awfulness. The Devil's Cartel is so unimaginative and does nothing new or interesting. The heroes are utterly charmless, and the game has this feeling of being rushed with dodgy textures and bugs that should have been ironed out before launch. Fans of the series were also furious about Salem turning into a villain, feeling it betrayed his character from the original games. Reaction to the game was lukewarm at best, and there have been no signs of putting a new game into development in the 3 years since. Number 2, Dino Crisis 3. Dino Crisis was a ready-made franchise, because combining Resident Evil-style horror with dinosaurs is a license to print money. The first 2 games did well critically and commercially, but Dino Crisis 3 made the tactical error that most horror movie franchises make when they run out of ideas. They went into space. Maybe in the right hands there might have been a decent game to come from that idea, but Dino Crisis 3 was not that game. It famously has one of the worst camera systems in gaming, where it always appears to be strategically placed to cause the player maximum annoyance at any given time. There's also a shocking lack of enemy variety, meaning you'll quickly get bored of blasting the same type of space lizard again and again, and worst of all for a survival horror game, there's a severe lack of tension or horror. Needless to say that fans reacted badly, and Capcom themselves have admitted the weak reception is the reason they haven't gone back to the series in the following years. Number 1, Duke Nukem Forever. Duke Nukem Forever is, like myself, legendary for all the wrong reasons. The title became a self-fulfilling prophecy and an industry joke, and it took a full 15 years of development before it finally came out, and then people immediately wished it would go back in. It was an ugly, badly designed mess with dated humour and joyless gameplay. Even Duke's trademark comedy was tired, with Forever turning him into an unlikable meathead who seems to actually enjoy the misery that's going on around him. The Hive level has become infamous for its gross and jarring change of tone, but the game's biggest sin, bar none, is it's just no fun to play. The developers argued over who was to blame for the mess, and Forever has such a bad reputation it wouldn't be a shock if it took another 15 years for Duke to reappear again, if at all. Do you have any game franchises that ended up as floaters in the toilet bowl of life? Then drop us a message in the comments below. And if you want to tell me how I'm gonna die, you can do so here and here. If you enjoyed the video, then like, share and subscribe for more. I've been Jules for WhatCulture.com, and I'll see you soon.